wealth and wisdom, time will rise. Optimistic, educated to sharing your wealth, building things you should do. From trust to banking, it's all a must. Your guide to wealth is learning to trust. Legacy matters, secure it right. Dreams take shape with every insight. Wills and assets, life insurance plans, building for your future with expert hands. Sometimes money and more, building wealth with knowledge galore. Asset protection plans to grow, to read and watch your dreams overflow. From saving today to trust for life, breaking generational wealth divides. Healthcare directives, banking tips, we're here to help your fortune eclipse. From saving today to trust for life, breaking generational wealth divides. Healthcare directives, banking tips, we're here to help your fortune eclipse. So tune in now, it's time to run. So wisdom's your return. Invest, protect, and thrive for sure. Signing off is all talks, money, and more.
Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome to another edition of So Talks Money and Show, the talk show where we educate, inform, enlighten, and empower our community. It is so good to be here this first Monday in July. I am your host, Dr. Sabrina Edmon Williams, educator, author, and investor, opening minds and closing contracts. I am so noted, and I am so excited and so delighted to be here today. Now, if you are just joining us this week, if you missed last week, you missed a lot. You are going to join us right in the middle of our conversation about a new law that actually went into effect on Wednesday, July the 1st. So I invite you to go to my YouTube page or my Facebook page at I Am So Noted. That's IAMSEW NOTED. And catch up with this conversation. You don't want to miss this, especially if you are a Mississippi voter. You need to be a part of this conversation. And this morning, Dr. Williams will not only be talking about this law, we have invited one of our Mississippi state representatives, Representative Zakia Summers, will be joining us here by phone this morning to walk this thing out. It is so important that we are informed voters. So please call a friend, text a friend, wake someone up. If you are not able to catch this show live, certainly take the time to listen to the replay, because we don't want you to get to the polls in November and be surprised about not being able to participate in the electorate process. So please, please, please watch this episode, share it with your friends, and be a part of this conversation. Now, again, excuse me, y'all gonna have to bear with me today. I don't feel bad, but I don't necessarily sound my best, but we're gonna push our way through this because it's too important for us not to do so. What we are talking about this morning is Senate Bill 2588, the SHIELD Act. Now, SHIELD is actually an acronym for Safeguard Honest Integrity in Elections and Lasting Democracy. This act requires Mississippi to verify voter citizenship using federal databases when needed, notify applicants flagged as non-citizens, and require proof of citizenship within 30 days. It also adds annual state-level database checks, reporting requirements, and protects related personal data from public disclosure. That's what it actually aims to do, okay? That's what it actually aims to do. And this particular act has very significant impact in that there is an effort right now at the national level to pass something similar. It has not passed at the national level, but Mississippi decided that we were going to lead in something. All of a sudden, we want to be the leaders now. So we went ahead and passed our own version of this act that is in question in the legislature at the national level. So the SHIELD Act, again, if you missed us last week, I invite you, please, I implore you to go and listen to that episode because we did some educating. Dr. Williams was in her element. I did some teaching last week. We defined some terms for you so that you could understand exactly what we are talking about when we say certain things. Now, I don't have time to do that this week. If you didn't come to class last week, again, go catch the replay. Because today we have to jump right into this conversation. Again, we're talking about two things that we've answered so far. Last week, we talked about what is the law, what the new law is, and what the new law requires. Now, this show, we're going to tackle perhaps the most debated question of all. You want to know why Dr. Williams is even talking about this? What am I concerned about? So, one of the things that we have to consider with the passage of this law is, can a law designed to protect election integrity also create unintended barriers for some eligible voters? That is the question at the heart of the public discussion actually surrounding the SHIELD Act. Sometimes the hardest public questions aren't about choosing between right and wrong. They're actually about balancing two important values. So let's talk values. Let's talk about those two values that many people share. Let's start with the positive, something that we can all agree on. Now, many people on opposite sides of this particular debate actually agree on two basic principles. One, only eligible citizens should vote. I think we can all agree on that. There's no discussion, no debate when it comes to that. Second thing is eligible citizens should be able to vote without unnecessary barriers. We've already lived through that. You know, we've already lived through the poll taxes and all these different tests that people had to take in order to participate in this process. So there should be no unnecessary barriers placed on a person who is trying to exercise their right to vote. Most Americans would likely agree with both of those statements. So even at the national level, I think there is a consensus that first, only eligible citizens should be able to vote. And again, that eligible citizens should be able to vote without any unnecessary barriers. But now here's where the disagreement comes in. The disagreement isn't usually over the goals. The disagreement is typically over how to achieve both goals at the same time. Protecting elections and protecting voting rights don't have to be competing goals. The challenge is designing systems, laws, rules that accomplish both. So the question is, does the SHIELD Act do that? Does it protect election integrity, or does it create some unintentional barriers? Now, good morning to those of you who are just tuning in, whether you are joining us by radio at WNPR 90.1 FM, or if you are joining us on YouTube or Facebook, good morning to you. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. As I say, we are continuing the discussion from last week. We will be joined shortly by Mississippi State Representative Zakiya Summers, who is going to help us walk through this new law. But this morning, just to set the stage, to help you understand where we are with this law, let's look at a couple of things. Now, what are the supporters of this law saying? Supporters of the SHIELD Act argue that accurate voter registration rolls are an important part of election administration. And I think that's true. I don't argue that either. Supporters point out that citizenship has always been a legal requirement to vote, and they believe government agencies should use available records to help identify voter registrations that may require review. Some supporters also argue that even infrequent violations can undermine public confidence, and they view periodic verification as a preventive measure. From this perspective, the law is intended to strengthen confidence in the electoral process by helping ensure that voter rolls remain accurate. Okay? That's what the supporters of the law say. That's what they are standing on. Okay. Supporters actually see verification as a safeguard, not an accusation. As a safeguard, they want to make sure that only U.S. citizens are participating in the elections. Now, my question to those supporters of this law is, where is the data? I'm totally baffled, especially in a state like Mississippi, where every state level office in this state is held by the same party, from the governor to the lieutenant governor to the attorney general to the secretary of state. Everybody that's elected statewide is in the same party. Even when it comes to our national representatives, you only have one Democrat. Everybody else in this state is a Republican. So my question becomes, where is the concern about election integrity? Or should we be concerned? Perhaps there was some election integrity, which is why one party holds all the offices. I don't know, but I would love to know where data was available to suggest that there was an urgency to pass this law. And perhaps that's a question that we can ask Representative Summers when she joins us. Now, for those of you that are just tuning in, I will tell you this: we're going to do something a little bit different this morning. We're going to go to break a little bit earlier, and then Representative Summers should be joining us about 7:25 this morning. She'll be calling in. So you don't want to miss that. Don't take a break. Don't tune out. And if you have to leave, as I said, please catch the replay, watch the replay. We are streaming live on both YouTube and Facebook. Now, those that are critics, what exactly are they saying? What are the concerns? Again, does this law really protect election integrity, or does it create unintended or maybe intended barriers? Now, civil rights organizations, including the organizations that many of us are familiar with, have expressed concerns about how the law could affect eligible voters. Eligible voters. That means you and I. And that is why it is so important for us to be a part of this discussion. Their concerns generally focus less on citizenship requirement itself and more on how the verification process is carried out. Among the questions they have raised are, could government databases contain outdated information? How quickly are records updated after someone becomes a naturalized citizen? What happens if agencies have different versions of a person's name? Sound familiar, anybody? Will voters receive timely notice if there is a question about their registration? Will people have enough time and information to respond before an election? These organizations argue that the answers to those questions, implementation, Those implementation questions matter because errors in administrative records can affect real people. That's you and I, okay? The strength of a law often depends on the fairness of its implementation. The strength of a law often depends on the fairness of its implementation. Now, you've probably heard this word before. It's called voter disenfranchisement. But do you really understand what we mean when we say that? Simply put, it means that an eligible voter is prevented from voting or faces obstacles that make voting more difficult. Things like changing the mail-in process, or cutting early voting, or decreasing the number of polling places. Any of that sound familiar? It's going on all over the country. Those are things that create obstacles that could potentially prevent people from participating in the process or make it more difficult for people to participate. And these things can happen for different reasons. Now, let's look at history, because historically disenfranchisement has included laws that explicitly excluded certain groups of people. Today, the term is also used in discussions about administrative barriers, such as registration issues, documentation problems, or errors that affect otherwise eligible voters. Whether a particular law results in disenfranchisement is often a matter of legal and public debate. And in some cases, courts are asked to resolve those questions. You have to go all the way to the courts. And right now, the courts, especially the highest court in the land, I'm going to be honest, some of the rulings that are coming down are very disappointing. I'll just put it that way. Very disappointing. A right on paper is only meaningful if people can reasonably exercise it. Doesn't matter what the paper says, what your rights are. If you cannot reasonably exercise it, a right on paper means absolutely nothing. Now, again, the SHIELD Act requires verification of voter citizenship using federal databases. So here are some of the concerns that people have when it comes to these databases. Let's just kind of take a deeper dive and a closer look at these databases. How many of us have had an experience where a bank account had the wrong address on it? Or even your credit report. Do that, because mine does. My credit report declares that I live in Jackson, Mississippi, and I do not live in Jackson, Mississippi. I live in Jackson, but in Mississippi, but I do not live in Jackson, Mississippi. So that is a database that has inaccurate information. Medical records that need correcting. Insurance information that wasn't updated. Think about it. Every time you go to the doctor, the very first thing they typically ask you is your information still the same? Do you still have the same insurance? Because things change in people's lives. What about a driver's license with a typo, or even perhaps a birth certificate with the misspelling of your name? Government databases, like private databases, depend on accurate information being entered and updated over time. The information is actually entered into the database, okay? Entered right now by humans. And Lord knows we are subject to error because we are human. Just because it's a government database doesn't mean it is reliable. It does not mean that the information is accurate. It does mean that when they identify a possible discrepancy, additional review may be needed before reaching a conclusion. That's one reason the SHIELD Act includes a notice and response process rather than directly, immediately removal based solely on a database match. And I do remember, you guys, a situation where I remember on one of my mortgage statements, the person who entered the information, I guess inadvertently, put my social security number on my husband's information and his social security number on mine. So every time I would call them to ask them a question, of course, they went through this verification process and they would ask me to verify myself by my social security number. And I would start blah, 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 blah. And they would say, no, that is not correct. And I'm like, okay, you asked me for my social security number. And finally, I just started giving them my husband's information because they would not otherwise talk to me without me giving them the information that they incorrectly entered. I don't know that our mortgage was eventually sold to another company, and I'm not sure that we ever got that straight with that company. But I just wanted to give you an example of how database information is not always accurate. Technology can identify questions. People still have to answer them fairly. People still have to answer those. So, who could be affected by record mismatches? Without assuming that any particular group will be disproportionately affected, it's helpful to understand the kinds of situations that can lead to record discrepancies. So, for example, a person who legally changed their name after marriage or divorce could be affected by a mismatch because, of course, your name after marriage is not going to be the same name that's on your birth certificate. If you change your name in a divorce situation, then it's not going to match. A naturalized U.S. citizen whose immigration records and voter registration records are not perfectly aligned. Someone whose records contain a clerical error. And again, people are human. They make mistakes when entering this information into these databases. Individuals with similar names whose records require careful review. Anybody a senior and a junior? Okay, similar names. These examples do not mean a person is ineligible to vote. That is not what I'm suggesting, you guys. I am simply giving you some examples of who could be affected by record mismatches. Now, I'm looking at the clock. We're going to go ahead. For those of you that are just tuning in, just hold tight. You have joined us right in the middle of our conversation. We are continuing our discussion this morning that we started last week on the new Mississippi law that went into effect on July 1st, the SHIELD Act. We're going to go to a quick break. And hopefully on the other side of this break, Mississippi State Representative Zakiya Summers will be joining us by phone because there are some things that we have got to make sure that we understand about this new law and how to navigate things that could potentially affect us and our ability to vote, because we know that November is the midterms and we all need to be participating in these elections, every election cycle, but particularly the upcoming midterm election. So, Mr. Armstrong, I'm going to throw it to you. We're going to take a short break. And then on the other side of the break, I think I hear the phone ringing, but on the other side of the break, we look forward to our guests joining the platform. Thank you.
Like skies and shine, so talks money, the future's alive. Grab your coffee, let's take a ride. It's wealth and wisdom, time will rise. Off the list, educated to worth is learning to trust. Legacy matters, secure it right. Dreams take shape with every insight. Rules and access, life insurance plans. Good for your future with expert hands. Still talk money and more. Building wealth with knowledge galore. Asset protection plans to move. To win and watch your dreams unfold. From saving today to trust for life. Breaking generational wealth.
There is no call in the queue. Thank you.
Hello. Hello.
Hey, this is Representative Summers.
Hi, Representative Summers. We're on a quick break. I'll bring you in as soon as we go back live, okay?
Okay.
All right. All right. Good morning, you guys, and welcome to Soul Talks Money and More. I am your host, Dr. Sabrina Edmon Williams. If you are just tuning in, you have tuned in at the perfect time. We are continuing our discussion from last week regarding the SHIELD Act, this new law that went into effect on July 1st, last Wednesday, and it could potentially impact many of us. As I mentioned before the break, we are joined in this segment of the show by one of our Mississippi state representatives, Zykia Summers. Good morning, Representative Summers.
Good morning. Good morning.
Thank you so much for getting up so early and joining us on the show this morning. We certainly appreciate you. I have been educating our listeners the past 2 weeks on the new SHIELD Act and the potential impact that this law could have on us. Now, I would like to ask you, Representative Summers, what concerns you, or do you have any concerns regarding the SHIELD Act?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Williams, for inviting me to be on the show, and I really appreciate you spending time on this topic because many of us, as you said, could be affected by this new law. So what I'm mainly concerned about as it relates to the SHIELD Act is that folks will not know that their voter record has been flagged, and when they go to the precinct to vote in November, they won't be on the poll books. Mm-hmm. And we call that voter suppression. Mm-hmm. So I just want to be clear that the SHIELD Act does not take away your right to vote, but it could pose some barriers when you go and vote. And so we're encouraging, and that's why it's so important that we talk about this law so that folks are informed about what they need to do. So we're encouraging all voters to call their circuit clerk's office or their election commission's office and make sure that they're listed as a registered active voter. That is very important. And also to let your relatives know, to let your church members know, your neighbors know that they also need to check their voter registration status. Because the law says that the Secretary of State's office will not only be using new voter registrations within what's called the SAVE system, which is a federal database, to see if there are any flags on the new voter registration. But the Secretary of State could also go through the entire SIMS system, which is a statewide election management system. So that means you, me, anyone else who's already registered and has been voting on an annual basis to determine whether or not they have flags on their record. So it's very important that we check and verify that we are still registered and active.
Okay, so again, for our listeners, for our viewers, because we do have viewers on both Facebook and YouTube, Representative Summers says, which entity, because that's a question we have been asked, which entity do they go to verify that they are an active voter, Representative Summers?
Yes, ma'am. You call your local county circuit clerk's office or your local county election commissioner's office. In Hinds County, our circuit clerk, of course, is Zach Wallace. And depending on which district you live in Hinds County, you have your own election commissioner. But once you call the Hinds County Election Commission office, the office manager can also go into the SAM system and look up your name. She may ask, a few questions to verify who you are, and then she will help to determine whether or not your voter registration status is active. If you are listed as inactive, then you will likely have to complete a confirmation card to let the circuit clerk's office know, or the election commissioner's office know, that your address has been updated or your name has been updated. You need to know that and do that, particularly for folks who have recently moved into the county, or even if you have moved from one neighborhood to the next. For our ladies who have gotten married and their names have changed, you want to make sure that you have all of that information updated so that when you go to your precinct on election day, you don't have any issues. You can vote by the regular process. Now, even if you are listed as inactive on election day and you have not taken heed to the things that we're telling you this morning, you will still be able to vote, but you'll have to vote by affidavit. And affidavit ballots can be very tricky because if you do not complete that affidavit ballot and that envelope to the T, it could be kicked out and not counted. And even with the affidavit ballot, you still have to go to the circuit clerk's office within 5 business days and present your ID or present some form of verification so that they know that your address is connected to that precinct where you voted by affidavit. So to avoid all of that, to avoid any of those barriers, we say go ahead and call now, call today, call this week, and verify. And then you can even ask the circuit clerk's office or the election commission to mail you your voter registration card. That way you know that you are certainly registered, you're active, and on your card, it will list your precinct. So if you have any questions about, hey, I know redistricting has been done. I'm not quite sure if the same precinct that I voted in November was the same that I voted last time. I just want to make sure that I know where to go and vote. So that precinct name and address will also be listed on your voter registration card. And for parents who are getting ready to register their scholars back to school, you can also use your voter registration card as one of those proofs of residency. And that helps through the process to make sure that the kiddos are all ready to go back to school, which is literally right around the corner. I believe it's July 28th. So having that voter registration card is very effective and very handy to have.
Yes. And so what I heard you say a lot, but one of the things that I don't want us to gloss over is, a lot of times we have these discussions in our communities about the importance of voter registration. And I certainly think that that is important. But the people that will be impacted by this law and the changes brought about by this law are not people who are not registered to vote necessarily, but by those who already are registered. So voter participation is essential, and part of that participation process, Representative Summers, is taking the initiative on the front end to make sure that you are on the voter rolls. Would you not agree?
Absolutely. And this law is truly designed to suppress the votes of particular groups of people. And we call those groups marginalized communities. These are, your older adults who may not be able to access their birth certificate. These are married women whose names don't match the name that's on their birth certificate. These are rural voters who don't have the resources or transportation to be able to order their birth certificate or come to Jackson in order to retrieve birth certificate. These are families with limited incomes who may struggle to obtain the various documents that are listed in the law that prove, and let me just go back a little bit because I didn't say this. The purpose of this law is to verify your citizenship. It's to verify your citizenship. Now, the authors of this bill, of this law, and the proponents of this law say that what they're attempting to do is to prevent any illegal immigrants from being able to vote. And so then you may ask the question, well, are illegal immigrants voting? Is there data or proof to support that we have illegal immigrants going into the precincts and voting?
That's my question.
The answer to that is no.
Okay, that is my question.
The answer to that is no. Even the author of the bill said on multiple occasions that there is very little data. It may be like 0.1%, right? So very little evidence to show that illegal immigrants are voting, which means that although that is the target, we are all at risk, particularly in the state of Mississippi, where it's already very hard to vote. We make it very hard for people to vote, and we make it very hard for people to be able to access, whether they have the birth certificate, a passport, etc., to be able to show that they are indeed a citizen. I've been in several rooms and I've talked about this law ad nauseum. And I always ask the question, raise your hand if you have a passport. And I can tell you about 10% of the room will raise their hand and say that they have a passport. Most Americans don't have a passport because it's unlikely that they have traveled internationally. A lot of folks don't have a birth certificate. I can tell you, I was born in Houston, Texas, and it took me a while for me to get my birth certificate. It took about, I believe, 5 or 6 weeks. And that could even be the case if you are born in Mississippi. It will take time. And so what the law says is, if you go to register to vote, or the Secretary of State's offices, verifies the SIMS system through the SAVE system, and I'll talk a minute about how the SAVE system is different from the SAVE Act, because I know a lot of people have been hearing about the SAVE Act. Okay. The SAVE system is different from that. But if they decide to do that, verify your registration status, and a flag comes up on your voter record, then you will be sent a confirmation card to confirm that you are a citizen. All right. Well, how do you even know that the confirmation card has been sent? You don't know. The only thing that you know is that once you receive that, you probably have less than 2 to 3 weeks, if that, to be able to provide a document, your birth certificate or your passport, a proof of citizenship document, to the circuit clerk's office to let them know that you are indeed a citizen. You only have a 30-day window to provide that proof. So say, for example, let's just say today, July 6th, the confirmation card is sent out. Hopefully, luckily, the Postal Service is working expeditiously and you get that card on Friday. Well, it's hard to do business on Friday. You can't do business on the weekends. On Monday or Tuesday, you go to the health department to request your birth certificate and you have the funds to do it. You may be able to receive it that same day, maybe later that week or the following Monday. Well, now you only have 2 weeks left to get that information to the circuit clerk's office to prove that you are who you already say and know that you are. So you see, listening audience, that this is indeed another way to make it hard for folks to be able to exercise their first-class citizenship right to be able to vote and select the candidates of their choice. And we know, you and I both know, that's going to be so critical this November because this election is going to set what happens over the next generation of folks here in Mississippi and across this country.
Representative Summers, I was telling the audience earlier, it's very interesting to me. Now, I'm very passionate about several issues that we have going on here in the state of Mississippi, particularly as someone who has been personally affected by the loss of my firstborn grandchild just a few months ago. I am particularly interested in the fact that this state is at the very, very top of the list when it comes to infant mortality. I think we're number 2, maybe in women's health issues. And all of those things are very important. But what I found very interesting is in the approach we took to those things, the things that we are struggling in, people losing lives, we found a way to circumvent those issues and take those to committee to study those type things. But when it came to this election integrity, with absolutely no evidence that there is any election integrity in a state where one party pretty much rules the state, we had to act with swiftness to make sure that we are protecting the integrity of our elections. And I just kind of find that laughable. And I do understand that, when there is a super majority, pretty much anything that they want can get pushed down our throats and we sit passively by. And that's why I think it is so important that our listeners understand. I think this state is about 40% African Americans.
They say 38%, but I think it's more 40%.
Yeah, and so we have got to stop. We got to do some checks. This is so important because the people that are going to be impacted by this SHIELD Act or our grandparents, our great-grandparents who do actively participate in the process. These are the people that don't have birth certificates. And I wanted you to just take a moment to explain. We've said some things, but this is an educational platform, so I like for my audience to be informed. What are the documents that prove citizenship? What are the only documents that prove citizenship?
Absolutely. So there are 3 types of documents that you can present in order to prove that you are a United States citizen. The first one is your birth certificate. And, we've talked about that and I've walked through that process on how to retrieve your birth certificate. The second document is a passport. I do have a passport, but you know what? I am the only one in my household who has a passport. Mm-hmm. My husband doesn't even have a passport, and we definitely need to work on that. But as I said, there are many Mississippians and citizens across this country that don't have a passport. And then the third document is your naturalized paper. So that's for those individuals who have become naturalized citizens here in the United States. They've taken the class, they've taken the test, they passed the test, and now they are a naturalized citizen. So those are for your individuals who were not born here, but they moved into the United States and became a citizen. Those are the only 3 documents, according to the law, according to the SHIELD Act, that you can provide to prove that you are a U.S. citizen. And I want to go back to a couple of things that you shared in terms of the expediency that the legislature moved to pass this law. And I will tell you that it was not without some hurdles and without a fight, because Democrats, Black Caucus members, we brought both the chairman of the House Elections Committee and the Senate Elections Committee within our caucus meeting, and we had a hearing with them. We talked about this bill at length. We shared with them the risks that we saw associated with this bill. We talked with them about our position, why this was going to hurt Mississippians who, have been voting and have never had an issue before, and may all of a sudden have a barrier when they go to the precinct. We expressed why we would not be supporting this bill. We had multiple conversations with them and with leadership and with committee members following that meeting to talk about why this was a bad bill. We talked with media about it. We talked with our advocacy partners about it. We talked with constituents about it. So we did all that we could do within the process to try to slow it down and to ultimately kill it. As you stated, it was a general bill, which means it only needed a majority vote. And in the House, we have a supermajority Republican House. On the Senate side, we have been able to break the supermajority, but the Republicans still have a majority in the Senate, which means that it makes it very difficult for us to be able to kill these types of bills unless we're able to get our colleagues from across the aisle to join in with us and vote no. And I'll tell you why they didn't vote no. They didn't vote no because they believe that they have a mandate from this administration to do the most terrible, awful things to ordinary citizens to make life harder for them, whether it comes to voting, whether it comes to accessing healthcare, whether it comes to having a quality of life, whether it comes to being able to afford the cost of living. Unfortunately, this administration has given them the support and the approval to be able to introduce these kinds of legislation and move them through the process. And now we have to do, the work that we're doing now, which is to educate voters so that they know what's on the horizon and they can prepare for that as best as they can. And so we're going through communities, we're going to churches, we're going to various meetings and town halls across the state to let folks know, go ahead and prepare yourself for this now. If you can, by all means, retrieve those documents that we listed, the birth certificate, the passport, the naturalized papers, so that if this comes up for you, if your record is flagged, you have already obtained what you need, and you will have the ability to vote and select those individuals that you want to vote for in November. And I tell folks this all the time because we have dealt with voter apathy for too long. I don't know what circumstance causes the apathy. I don't know if it's miseducation, if it's misinformation, if it's just a decision that, hey, I'm not going to vote because my vote doesn't count. But where we are in this point of time, in this moment in history, we cannot allow the couch to win. That is what they're betting on. That is why they are proposing and passing these laws, because they want us to give up. They want us to not have hope, to not exercise our right to vote. If we don't vote this time in November, people, and I'm sure you've heard this from many guests and many talk show hosts for quite a long time, they want to, and they are, not want to, they are in the process right now of making Project 2025 actual life for us. They have rolled back the freedoms and the gains that we have made. They have made voting harder. They have, gutted the Voting Rights Act, which makes it very hard for marginalized and Black and brown communities to be able to select candidates of their choice. They've taken a woman's autonomy away of making decisions over her own body. So they are being very specific and targeted at the people that they want to attack, and we cannot allow them to win by not participating. And then we say voting is just the first step. Voter registration and the actual process of voting is just the first step. You also have to be engaged at every level of the process.
Right.
This is what I say. If you aren't doing politics, politics is doing you.
Right.
The question is, how do you want to be did?
Right.
That's the question.
Right.
And that means that you have to be involved and you have to be engaged.
Well, Representative Summers, I'm looking at the clock and I don't want to go over time, but I do want to address a question that has come through on social media. Excuse me. The person says 40% of our population is African American, but what percent of African Americans are registered voters? And of that percent, how many regularly engage in the election process? Do we have that data available?
I don't have that data on hand, but I will tell you that in 2023, we had statewide elections. Statewide means governor on down, right? Governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, state auditor's office, attorney general, treasurer, public service commissioners, transportation commissioners, and all your legislative districts. We had an opportunity in 2023 to elect Brandon Presley for governor of the state of Mississippi. Brandon Presley only lost by about 26,000 votes. Hinds County has, I believe, 100 and, don't quote me on this, but I believe it's 120,000 voters who are registered here in Hinds County. I can actually Google it and just make sure I'm saying that right. But nevertheless, we had less than, I believe, 10% turnout during that election. If we had Hinds County alone, just Hinds County alone, because, you know, everybody across the state is always waiting to see what is Hinds County going to do? What is Hinds County going to do? And because Hinds County is a majority Black county, naturally, candidates and those who are watching the voter results assume that Hinds County is going to go Democrat because we are majority Black city. If Hinds County had turned up and turned out the vote in November, we would have Brandon Presley as a governor, and we would have more of checks and balances within our government. Because if the SHIELD Act had passed, Brandon Presley was governor, he could have vetoed that bill. Now, that doesn't mean that the legislature doesn't have the ability to override the veto. We do. According to the Constitution, we have the ability to override governor's vetoes. But we still could have slowed down the process or maybe even stopped this bill from becoming law altogether. That's the power of voting for individuals that represent your interests and are prioritizing your concerns with policy solutions. Right. And so that's why it's so important with Mississippi having as the caller or the listener said, about a 40% African American population. We should be having more of an impact when it comes to these local and state races, particularly our state races. And if we turn out the vote, you know, they say the squeaky wheel always gets the oil. Right. If we turn out the vote, then we're showing that we actually care about what happens in our communities. We care about what happens in our states. And we care about who gets elected. You're going to have to answer to us because we're going to hold you accountable as a result of the voter turnout rate. And so, yes, to the listener, we can make a difference, but we've got to show up and we've got to show out at that ballot box. Yes, ma'am. I do agree with everything that you just said. And as I mentioned last week, I'll share this and then I'm going to give you a moment to wrap up. But I had a friend that has shared something with me on a couple of occasions, and he actually shared this with me again last week. In visiting the two Mississippi museums, he said one of the things that stands out to him is he notices where they have the monuments of the various lynchings that took place here in the state. He said when you look at the information in there, you see this period where we had, you know, the first Black U.S. senator from our state, Hiram Revels. You see this period called Reconstruction. And
between the end of Reconstruction and the beginning of the lynchings, I think he said it's about a 6-year period. And the point that he was trying to make is it doesn't take very long. You mentioned us going backwards and what has been taken away from us. I think a lot of us are moving through life too comfortable with blinders on, thinking it's not my responsibility. I live good on my side of the street, and because things are great on my side of the street, they're great everywhere else. And so we don't participate. We are not engaged. So as a final question to you, Representative Summers, I would like for you to address, regardless of where someone stands politically, what do you hope every Mississippian that's listening to us this morning, whether that's by Facebook, YouTube, or on the radio, what do you hope that every Mississippian takes away from this conversation about voting rights, civic participation, and the importance of staying informed?
Oh, that's a great question. I had an opportunity over the last few days to take my family to New Orleans for the 4th of July holiday. And of course, this is on the heels of Juneteenth. In New Orleans, they had a beautiful fireworks show on the river. And it was so lovely. But the one thing that truly stood out for me was the number of people who gathered to watch the fireworks show. Sitting next to me was a white family. Sitting next to them was an Indian family. On the left side of me was a Spanish-speaking family. Beneath me was an Asian family. And I said, wow. I said, this is America. This is the America that I love and I appreciate. The diversity that America holds. The fact that all of us can gather in open, common areas and spaces without having to be afraid, without having to determine whether or not we can even take a seat, without having to determine whether or not we can have access to those spaces, and we can sit and enjoy what was America's 250th birthday. And the reason why we had that opportunity to do that is because the Black folks in Mississippi, and particularly across the South, endured so many sacrifices, so much death, so much hurt and pain and hate. But you know what they didn't do? They didn't just sit by the sidelines and say, you know what, there's nothing I can do about it. They decided to get involved and fight for their own human rights. Mm-hmm. And as a result of them fighting for their own human rights, every other community has benefited from the civil rights movement and from those people who struggled, and they filed lawsuits, and they participated in marches and protests and sit-ins, and they lost family members to lynchings, and they lost sons and daughters who were targeted and attacked and thrown in the Mississippi River. They stood up for themselves and for their communities. And now all of America can go to the bathroom, okay? All of America can go to New Orleans and enjoy the 250th birthday. That's on our backs. And so what I want every Mississippian to know and to understand, that we are all in this together. It might be Black folks right now. It might be Spanish speaking or brown communities right now. It could be you tomorrow. Mm-hmm. That's why we have to have each other's back. And when we see an injustice, we don't just throw our hands up and we say, oh, I wish somebody else will handle that, or that has nothing to do with me. If the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is rolled back, as the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is rolled back, and we just recently got a decision from the Supreme Court on citizenship,
Mm-hmm.
that is going to, those kinds of measures, those kinds of actions from legislative bodies or even the judiciary, that has impact on all Mississippians and all Americans. And so that's why we have to, show love for one another. When we see something, we say something about it. And again, we don't let the couch win. We get up, we get active, we participate in this process. Dr. King says the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice, but it only bends if we bend it. It only bends if we bend it. And so that means that takes action. That takes making sure that we're remaining educated and informed on what's going on, that we know who our legislators are, who represents us, and we call them. We show up at their office. We show up at the state capitol, and we express what we like and what we don't like. We tell them that we expect you to govern better on our. We don't want our brothers in our churches and our brothers and sisters in our churches and our neighborhoods to be hurt any further, because if they hurt, I hurt. So that's what we have to do. And just know that, our democracy may be a little fragile, but it doesn't have to be. The antidote to all of this is voting, and voting in strong numbers. And I believe we can do that. I know that we can do that. And, I appreciate folks like you who continue to spread the message and let folks know what's going on, because we say a more informed voter is a more active voter. So don't just take this information and keep it for yourself. Let somebody know what's going on so that we can be ready to show up and show out in November.
Well, thank you so much. I am totally out of time. I appreciate your being here this morning and talking to both my listeners and my viewers this morning. And I hope we take all of this information to heart. Don't just be hearers of the word, be doers of the word. Thank you so much,
Amen.
Representative Summers. We appreciate you and everything you're doing to advocate for everyday Mississippians. Now, to you, my listening and my viewing audience, thank you for being here. Again, if you did not catch the first part of our discussion last week, go over to my YouTube page, my Facebook page, I Am So Noted, and make sure that you catch up. We want you to be informed. We want you to be informed. We also invite you to tune in next week, as we will be preparing for our Each One Teach One community event. We are also doing a giveaway this weekend, Saturday, the 11th, at the New Horizon Rankin campus. It's my understanding there will be a giveaway / garage sale / back to school type event for families. Please stop in and support that event right there on Flowood Drive, down from the hospitals. And we look forward to seeing you back next week, unless they fire me because I've gone over my time right here Monday morning. So it's Talking Money and More. Peace.
So talk money and more. Talk money and more.